line with their commitments. But we will continue our discussion how to fight against the disinformation, and this is very important. We have to speak what are the most serious threats right now, because those threats keep changing dynamically, and who and how should lead this fight against disinformation at the national level, state level, and how strategically implement all of this, and also about the role of social media platforms in promoting media literacy and fight against disinformation. So I will name all the participants: Viktors Makarovs, Special Envoy on Digital Issues at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Latvia; Andris Mellakauls, Head of Information Space Integration Division of Ministry of Culture of Latvia. He has worked for Time Warner and also is former deputy head of EPRA and also the Society Media Committee leader. Jānis Sārts, director at NATO Strategic Communications Center of Excellence, also the state secretary, former state secretary. Also, we are trying to connect to our discussion a head of strategic communications at State Chancellery of Latvia, who has previously worked for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Rihards, Bambals, and also we are waiting for Mārcis Balodis, researcher of Center of East European Policy Studies, who has also participated in research of pro-Kremlin disinformation and also debunking all these disinformations, and also he has worked with disinformation risks. So while our colleagues are connecting to our conversation, a little technical break, and we are returning in a minute.
And now, Mārcis Balodis, researcher of Center for East European Policy Studies; Rihards, Bambals, Head of Strategic Communication of State Chancellery of Latvia; Jānis Sārts, Director for NATO Strategic Communication Center of Excellence. And thank you to all who participate in this conference, Media Literacy and Roadmaps. And we are continuing. We are drawing your attention to, and now we are going to ask you very briefly, up to 5 minutes, to reply to the question: what do you believe is the most significant threats of misinformation now in Latvia? Let us try to accentuate the most significant ones. We are going to start with Mr. Viktors Makarovs, Special Envoy on Digital Issues at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Latvia. Hello, I hope you hear me. This moment here is today, tomorrow, and the day after. And it is clear that COVID misinformation is the big challenge and problem and threat. And here we need to be cautious that there are external sources of information, internal, and also voluntary connection to foreign sources of information. And I wanted to touch upon the external factor more. It is clear that the Russian government is very knowingly and intentionally spreading misinformation to the outside, distrust in vaccination they promote, and we see the examples how it all happens, how they are broadcasting lies about the vaccine, which is a classic example of misinformation in another state. But let us look at what is going on in Latvia. In Latvia, our neighbors don't have to do anything because people also don't trust the government. There are people who live also in the media environment of Russia themselves. They do it voluntarily, and unfortunately this all has negative consequences. What it means practically is that we cannot reach certain groups of society. We can reach some, and there must be measures implemented. And also, communication is not just a speaker which can be turned on and turned off when necessary. For the future, we need to understand that communication is part of processes ongoing for a long time. If there are some groups which are hostile and we have not developed dialogue with them, then it is very worrying. If we look at tomorrow, very near future, we are going to have parliament elections. In 2018, we had relatively few operations of misinformation from outside. If the potential enemies of ours, if they have some interest, well, here I don't have good news, because we are now in society under very tense situation. There is risk, there is fear, people distrust their government. Well, so to say, we have screwed this trust, and there's also another method that thieves go to homes and look at whether the doors are closed, locked or not. So this is very similar situation. If our door is open, metaphorically speaking, on our informational space, then we have problems. And do media organizations are ready for these threats or not? Is our society ready for solving this problem? Is it going to be entrusted to 4 or 5 people who are going to be responsible and who work in communication? We need to think about it today. This is the risk of today. It's not the risk of tomorrow. And the day after tomorrow, we don't know how the media environment looks like. Are we ready for what is tomorrow? Maybe it's not going to be Facebook, it's going to be other platforms, other data flows, how it is going to influence us. On the level of European Union, we have at least understanding how this environment can be regulated. We shouldn't blame on protection of human rights, but I think that the concern is implementation. Implementation is today's risk. If, for example, in accordance with the regulation we have planned, and we have it in the Act of Digital Services, if we do not have a national digital coordinator, which is the necessary institution, I think that we would have today already grounds for worry if we didn't have data analytics, who are expensive to hire. If we do not identify such people on the national level, it's not 2, 3, 5, it's tens of people, then I believe that this is the risk of today, regarding which we should be talking and thinking about today very seriously. Thank you very much, Viktors Makarovs. In relation to threats and risks of misinformation in Latvia, very particular examples. And now I would like to hear Andris Mellakauls, Head of Information Space Integration Division of Ministry of Culture of Latvia. Mr. Mellakauls? Yes, hello, thank you. And thank you also for this very important discussion and conference and event. At first, I would like to remind that During the EU presidency in 2015, we were the first ones, Latvia, we raised these issues on the level of Commission. We promoted discussions, also in between the ministries and councils. And this question was also included in the review of the process of the review of the directive. It was disguised like that. So we promoted the discussion of audiovisual service provision directive in the current geopolitical situation context. And there we identified that the freedom of speech is actually used for hate speech and for threatening the integrity of society and state. And your question, we are all single-minded about what is the most serious threat related to misinformation broadcasted by individuals, disseminated by individuals, for example, religious leaders, clerics, family members, and there are also anti-vaxxers now who use social networks in order to spread their toxic messages. And in such conditions, what are the consequences we all know very well. Maybe on international arena, the brightest example of COVID is Brazil, President of Brazil, who in the future could actually face trial because he is for crimes against humanity, he's indicted. And national security concept, it says there that there is an external threat for information space of Latvia, comes from Russia in order to destroy economic and social stability and sustainability. It also influences the society's opinion in the direction desirable for them. So Russia uses various different methods, including propaganda. And also, I will finish with one comment. I also mentioned the misinformation which is related to our foreign relations. There are lies being broadcasted about the international regulations. European Union Convention against violence in families and violence against women, the Convention of Istanbul. This what the lies are being spread regarding it too. This is NATO's strategic Stratcom director Jānis Sārts. What do you believe? What are the biggest threats of misinformation in Latvia? Hello to all, and I must begin with drawing what do we understand with the word misinformation? Is it changing the truth in for a special purpose to make the people react somehow in a certain way, and sometimes also involving various instruments for achievement of these goals? I think this is more than just distribution of misinformation when people oftentimes believe that it is truth, and they also voluntarily try to forward it, and they become the tools in the hands of those initial broadcasters of information. Of course, we understand that one of the key players here is Russia. For a long time they have been like that, but we also see local players increasingly more who do this in their own interests, be it financial, or maybe they are trying to grow their impact. And if we talk about vulnerability, then 4 years ago I'd say that Russian information space is this largest vulnerability, but currently the misinformation related to COVID-19, and as it is spread very widely, we see that the things are going on in a very simple way. And here I don't see such broad impact. The first one is the trust of the Latvian society. As we can see, the trust level, not only in government and politicians, we don't trust as people, also in between the individuals. It is very rare, but it is a completely different scene in, for example, Nordic countries, in Scandinavian countries. Then it is the quality of education. And maybe we are not in the last positions in the world according to education quality, but we can see that some of the indicators have been better than it might seem, and this is a paradox that I see today when we fight the pandemic and all the lockdowns. We actually face a different problem for future generations, is that we cannot focus on these issues. And the third thing I would say maybe is the biggest, is the social networks and how they have changed our information consumption habits, and how the algorithms are now influencing how we see the world. And it's a fact, regardless of so many attempts, actually this environment is without any control, and it works mainly for the profit of those companies. Which is worrying to me, is that this problem is growing, and as Mr. Makarovs said, tomorrow our problems are going to be bigger. Facebook is now rebranding to Meta, and content-wise we can see they are actually going towards augmented artificial intelligence, and if it just seems like so simple social media, if they have performed such fundamental, if they've been responsible for such fundamental changes in the society, for the society to understand what is what, I think that this new technology elements, if they are going to be used as Facebook will be doing it, probably not in the right way, then I think that the impact is going to be very, very strong, and we have to make ourselves, well, we should try prepare for it. If we compare to the previous speakers, Mārcis, Balodis, Eastern European Policy Research Center for Eastern European Policy Studies, Mārcis, Balodis, what are the largest threats currently? Good afternoon, and in my opinion the biggest threats for Latvia are that disinformation as a tool is actually very convenient for manipulating with society, because we understand that the society's perception of reality is being shifted, and we need to understand what is the source of that information. And I can also now refer to the professional work of my colleagues. Now we are implementing the project, and we are studying Russian disinformation in Latvia, pro-Kremlin, and this is not necessarily information spread from Russia, but all the information that is directed towards opposing Western cultures and Europe and Latvia, with the aim to conclude, to make some single conclusion or ability to discuss, and what is reality. This is a social problem, And the pro-Kremlin disinformation also uses open media space of Europe, and there they are working with their own principles regarding freedom of speech and diversity of opinion. And again, they're disguising, actually, they want to spread unreliable information. For example, there are some political institutions, organizations, or they call themselves neutral, but actually they are pro-Kremlin organizations in disguise. And the aim of all this process is to legalize unreliable information in order to gain trust from the community. And also misinformation as such, not also from Kremlin, is opportunistic. It does not occur from nowhere. They are speaking about topics which are important for the people. This is their attempt to approach and to cultivate a certain perception and manipulate the perception of what is going on. In particular, the example of Latvia is that our society is bilingual, and thus in the hands of Russia there are more resources. There are a lot of people in the society who consume Russian media, so misinformation becomes as a tool how to lead one part of the society in a different direction, which is beneficial for the propaganda. Of course, it is hateful towards Latvia and their position, both national and internationally. And here we also see that for them it is easier to manipulate with such society which is split, and this is why it all also continues. Why it is important. We need to understand that democracy is the ability of the society to discuss and cooperate within the society. However, misinformation is creating and facilitating the polarization, so that the society cannot communicate and cooperate. So they want to disturb the processes of decision making. This is the question of society integration. It is a complex of problems, but one is just a reference to political and social life aspects. Thank you. Thank you, Mārcis, Balodis. And now Rihards Bambals, Head of Strategic Communications and at State Chancellery of Latvia. What do you see through your perspective? What are the largest threats in Latvia which come from misinformation? Yes, hello, and I am glad to participate in such a panel of experts. I want to accentuate that State Chancellery is also glad to organize the event of this Media Literacy Week in cooperation with UNESCO and Ministry of Culture in Latvia. And also I am grateful for National Electronic Mass Media Council and other partners. I think my opinion is not going to surprise anyone. This is currently what we have, and we have also identified it like that. We're living in the environment of infodemics. This is one of the focus, and during all this week we have drawn attention to it, and this is the misinformation crisis. It has deceived people regarding the seriousness of COVID-19 pandemic, and it also, and due to that we had such bad statistics in vaccinations, and it influenced the opinion of the society. Currently, State Chancellery has countered this during this week by publishing a game, Go Viral, which we created together with Cambridge University and State Chancellery of the United Kingdom. This is the game of disinformation, where the player needs to be in the role of disinformation spreader, and they learn about these methods through that. Maybe fake expert, um, conspiracy theories, etc. What are their tools? They learn about what are their tools, and so they learn uh, how to fight it better. So I want to use this opportunity to promote this game. Go viral, and you can connect from 11 countries. It was previously also available in Russian. But why infodemic is so important and how we see its impact also in Latvia. We see that the opinion of the people in Latvia, what Kremlin has spread also in June, for example, when we had vaccines broadly available, then half of the society, 25% of the society, were very skeptical, but 1/4 had some more neutral view, and the narratives that were used at that time by asking these very skeptical people is that they said the same. They were talking as it was heard from the narrative of misinformation. They said that we want to know more information about side effects, etc. And our monitoring, which we perform every week, also right now, that one of the narratives regarding COVID, misinformation narrative, is that vaccines are experimental. They are more dangerous than the virus itself. This corresponds to media literacy study which was conducted last year. It means that less than 1/4, 23% of people cannot identify misinformation and manipulation from the facts. This answers the question, which is the most significant threat? The colleagues before me also said it is not the narrative of misinformation itself, which also we see other actors saying that Latvia is an unsuccessful state, but I think there are three effects I want to highlight, and I also mentioned. One is to polarize the society so that we distrust each other. It means we close down, we group ourselves in our support bubbles, creating illusion of security when we trust only our people. Then other aspect is that it creates this split. Basically, I would say it's a canyon already. It's not anymore just a fracture, and the divide is that it creates the disbelief in state institutions, disbelief in the future, in democratic processes, including elections, and that also has its consequences. And the third very dangerous narrative which creates the divide is the quality journalism or absence thereof. So if we rely on such tactics with which the large imperialistic state works, and they say that, for example, there is just no truthful information in the media, and there we go, we see people that do not believe the media at all, probably even when it is very high quality media, and if the seriousness of COVID-19 is being talked about and how the state fights it, well, this is actually a real problem. So this is trust on three levels. This is what I want to highlight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So about those three disinformation aspects, and now we will address our participants of the discussion with more targeted questions. So if we are trying to draw roadmaps in this conference, now I could ask a question. So what should be done? And right now I would like to turn to Mr. Sārts and also Mr. Makarovs. So what should be done and what should be implemented, looking at the media policy and also this problem actually now hasn't been controlled for some time. So what can we do now? Like Mr. Makarovs said that in some aspects should be dealt already today. So Mr. Makarovs, what do you say? So, like I said, we need to invest in our capacity and um, abilities, experts, tools. About technical things, Mr. Sārts will tell more, but here is the problem that Mr. Sārts works for the behalf of all NATO member states, but we need to grow capacity which is specifically targeted at our national security interests. And second is, colleagues, we are here representing, all of us are representing the public administration. So we will not avoid and we cannot cope without involvement of the NGOs, which adds and supplements to what the public institutions can do. And so we have to talk to the public. We have to have a different level of trust, and that can be ensured by the NGOs, and we have to support it. And the third thing, which is already going on, that we are not alone. We are not sovereign in the digital area. We are part of the EU. And so this framework is also created by the EU. One was already said, Digital Services Act, and also fight against COVID-19 disinformation. So we have to express our position and also be on top of things. And Latvia is not only um, involving, I must say that we are the member state which has discussed this question most actively. So we are moving forward in various directions, but we need resources and we cannot consider that this is priority number 30, which we pay attention to only if we have nothing else to do. Okay, Mr. Makarovs, thank you. Mr. Sārts, if you were mentioned, please you could continue. So when you look at Latvia, what do you see from your NATO hates? From NATO hates, okay. First of all, I would like to say that biggest emphasis, not only because disinformation and media literacy, but just generally looking at the directions the world is moving to education. Education is the most emphasis, high quality education, understanding that people who now go to school, they will live in a world where technologies will have changed so that we will not be able to recognize even them. And the basic jobs, professions, they will begin disappearing. So high quality education is very essential. And also here we have to speak about disinformation and to understand and to adjust and to adapt. And this is absolutely first emphasis. So to have high quality trainers and teachers. Second, about social networking sites, it was already mentioned. Latvia, we could draw up legislation for Facebooks and Googles and nothing would change, but I believe that we can be one of the leaders that try to encourage the EU to move forward faster. And even though Mr. Makarovs already said about various regulations and how they are moving towards them, but my problem with all this is speed. Because in this Digital Services Act, this is basically created for the reality which is yesterday, and terminology is moving forward, and all these networks have to be regulated. And when we have created this, we also need to be able to implement them and also find the ways how to understand what is going on. And I also agree to Mr. Makarovs that for us we need a experts of new technologies in the public administration. We have to be able to follow and to trace And also we have to have a possibility to, by help of the state police and also other instruments, to create preconditions that people feel safe and protected in this environment in comparison with situations we have had recently. But that also requires knowledge and skills in various areas, including the system of internal affairs. Yes, thank you. The events of the last couple of days, there are examples which illustrate what Mr. Sārts was saying. Mr. Talking about the platforms, Mr. Sārts already spoke about how to communicate and how to get the reaction, fast reaction to what is happening with disinformation. And so, what do you see? What are the next few steps we have to make in order to be able to work with those platforms and try to stop this disinformation, not allow to flourish, not allow it to flourish? I liked Jānis's recommendation to ensure that this Digital Services Act is moving faster. Yeah, this is very optimistic. But talking about the social media, a lot has been already done. We have the Commission announcement countering disinformation, and also what Lubos spoke about, this practice codex signed by Google and Facebook and TikTok, and this is under very heavy criticism. Also we have DSA, where it is said that there is role of risk assessment in digital platforms, and the platforms will have a duty to assess risks and make sure that this code of action is included. Egmont was also mentioned. Yesterday was Egmont conference, where the regional national centers were providing a vision what has to be done in order to counter disinformation. And it's very interesting that those centers are covering Denmark, Finland, France, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Poland, Slovak Republic, Norway. But significant and interesting that the Baltic states are not represented. And why? Also, talking about the platforms, I felt that it was said correctly that we lack data, and the state, we cannot create a national policy based on data and evidence if we don't have those data. And it is important to understand how this information is disseminated, how those algorithms function, and also Professor Persley um, from article in Washington Post also approves that there are a great harm done. The professor is writing, irrespectively whether this is disinformation, hate speech, or depressive content of adolescents, the governments cannot create the right policy if they don't know what is going on. Independent research about people using the social media platforms are very essential. And therefore, we had already organized a meeting with the European Commission involving NATO Stratcom Center and Ministry for Foreign Affairs and Ministry for Economics, and also the State Chancellery, discussing this issue, because we were worried about DSA Article 91, Part 4, which gives access to the researchers, um, exclude other institutions, for example, institution led by Jānis. So this is in this Digital Services Act. And I hope that we will change it and there will be a rational solution for this. Thank you. Mr. Makarovs, anything to add? Yes, right. So the first, right, we want this regulation to be approved at the European level as soon as possible in 2022. I hope DSA will be approved, and in 2023, are we ready to implement it? This is the first question. And second, the practice codes will be signed beginning of January, probably, hopefully. Are we ready to start using it? So the question about this speed is at the European level and also at the national level. And if in Egmont competition none of the Baltic states with their projects didn't get support, this is bad news, but good news is that we'll have another opportunity to apply. We have spoken very seriously to the Commission, and it can't be that the countries that are enjoying the most fruits of disinformation are without funding. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Makarovs, for your. And now we are turning to Richard Bambal, so the director of the strategic communication of the state chancellery. So, what has to be the foundations and basis of the communication with the public so that uh, this information has not so very good harvest, very good and very fruitful soil here. Yes, thank you very much. I would like to start with stepping back and saying that yes, we as Latvia have international achievements and we have also been heard also in the world in terms of fighting disinformation, also during the presidency, and that in Riga we have the Excellency Center of NATO Communication, and Latvia also in other international formats have made this issue topical, also in UN, OECD, and other places. But unfortunately, at the same time, nationally, we are lagging behind. And the structural unit I am leading now, I was happy that it was established, and it started operating since the beginning of the 2020, just before the pandemics. It was created, and it has been operating in the crisis management regime. So that means that we are still within the process of development. And at the same time, it makes me to ask a question. Are we ready to take a more responsibility, larger role in coordination between institutions, knowing that one cannot fight all the fights? And I would like to ask a rhetorical question. So how much can we expect from the institution with a team of 5 people and budget 270,000 and three-fourths go for remuneration? And then in the neighbor countries, there is a EU country where the funding, the neighboring country is financing various disinformation campaigns. So this is not a EU country, but a neighboring country that is financing disinformation campaigns. So very, very, very large amount. And at the same time, so what can we do alone? But at the same time, I would like to say that it's not that we are not doing anything. Irrespectively, we are a new institution. Our basic work was to fight against infodemics, and At the same time, it was also uh, dealing with symptoms and not with the basic reasons and looking at the causes. So what we are doing is monitoring the informational space in Latvia. We receive also organized trainings for officials of all institutions and ministries, and we will also build the national capacity. Mr. Makarovs was speaking about. We also provide recommendations to the state institutions. And it's not that we are not providing them, um, that they are not based on data and data analysis. We regularly do it, and several times a week we provide recommendations to the ministries and also institutions subordinate how to respond and how to react better. We also promote various sociological research, and we also have supported vaccination project with various strategic communication campaigns. What I wanted to say that there is still a process ahead, and this conference is a good point from where to start, because we need to develop a strategic concept for at the national level, where precisely it is determined what are responsibilities and priorities of various institutions, and we will work with it. And if you ask what is the success formula in fighting against disinformation, then previously I spoke about 3 levels, but now I would like to speak about 6 levels. So one success formula is increased media literacy level, so resilience to disinformation at the family level. Number 2, healthy independent journalism, so creating a content that people want to read and watch and hear. Number 3, this is active and involved civic society, and right now we feel the lack of that. At the state level, we lack a NGO or think tank that would profile in disinformation and monitoring and researching and analyzing that could serve to the state and state institutions and can be long-term partner. Number 4, the state um, provides information to the public and strategic communication, and also increasing capacity and support in fight against disinformation. Number 5, the 5th element would be successful international cooperation, and this Latvia has quite good with NATO and the EU, and being part of these organizations which are strategic communication champions. And point number 6 we have touched upon, and this is cooperation with social media platforms, not so much just about creation and designing regulations, but also daily cooperation to report about violations and limit the harmful content, and at the same time to promote visibility of the critically important content in the situations of crisis, like now during COVID-19. And here also we have a cooperation in the state chancellery. This is very good, with several larger social media platforms and possible improvements in the future as well.
Thank you. Thank you. The most important and difficult request could be for Mr. Balodis to conclude this in a way that you are currently here the only one who is not an official, state official. So could you evaluate what you just heard, what Latvia does, and is it capable of doing something in order to fight successfully the misinformation, and the rest maybe you can comment. I think definitely the awareness of the problem is the path towards the solution. I think in Latvia there is no problem with that. I think one thing, and of course I also do not represent all the society sector, but public sector, but when we fight the misinformation, I think we are all in one boat, so to say. I think one of the solutions that can help is our coordination and synchronization of our activities so that we can facilitate, so we can add to each other's work, so that it's not that we do all the same, but as if we actually do and we have the common goals. Looking into the future, I think that this is something we need to prepare ourselves for, is that misinformation in Latvia is already permanent and existing factor in Latvia. I think we need to also understand this when we speak broader, when the state is trying to communicate their position and their position in these questions, which is going to attempt to actually convince people of something other than how the position of the state is. Also undermining the competency of the state. And one of the main questions is, which we always need to keep in mind, is that disinformation, maybe it just will not pass itself. And also we are not there, we cannot fight this fight alone. This is a complicated problem, and most often it requires complicated solutions. Thank you, Mr. Balodis, and everyone else for today's this discussion. How to fight misinformation. Viktors, Makarovs, Andris, Mellakauls, Jānis, Sārts, Director of NATO Strategic Communications, Center of Excellence, Rihards, Bambals, Head of Strategic Communications, State Chancellery of Latvia, and Mārcis, Balodis, Researcher of Center for East European Policy Studies. We say thank you very much for being with us in this part of the discussion.